So thank you for joining us to our EEUK Fellowship lunchtime webinar. We're delighted to be joined live by colleagues who are interested in getting their fellowship or have maybe started or are working through a few ideas and want to see if they're in the right pathway, if they're doing the right thing. And I know some of you are joining us online later to hear this recording, so I hope this is useful to you. What we're going to be doing today is talking. Rob and I are hosting, so Rob is online and will be joining us in the workshops, but also hosting and helping me with the IT, so thank you. And also EUK directors and EUK fellows will be joining us, and that's an official picture of me saying hello with my ECT toolkit behind me, which is relevant, and I'll come to that in a minute. So I just really wanted to talk to you about EUK fellows. So I said we'd be joined by some. So this is the latest Hall of Fame that we have up. So you might recognise some faces from events you've been to, online workshops that you've done. Maybe you were at IEC, or maybe you know them from our board. So it's a right range of north, south, east, west, colleagues from all over the place. And we are lucky enough today to be joined by 8 colleagues who are going to talk to you about their process and their progress and how they became a fellow and why. They aren't joining us at the moment, so this will be in the second part of the call, which if you're joining online isn't being recorded because it's a chance to chat. But these are people who've offered their time, and as have all the fellows, are able, happy to talk about their experience and what they've done. So please, if you recognise a name and you want to chat to somebody, do drop them a line and we'll try and help connect you up if you wish. As I promised today, the agenda is a bit more structured for the first hour. So we'll be talking about the fellowship, talking about the pathways, because I know a few people want to check that they've picked the right one. And then in an hour's time, we'll be looking at actually how you do it, what you do, some tips and tricks. I will be talking a little bit about EUK's advice, but also my advice in the first session. But really, we're really delighted today to be joined by 2 fellows who are kind of going to head up with a little bit of why I wanted to become a fellow. So we've got Phil and Saida with us already. So thank you to them for giving up double the time of everybody else to join us. And they'll be talking to us about their experience in a minute. But I do want to do instructions with you. So I know people are eating their lunches and things, but please, if you want to type your name into the chat, say whether you're looking at practitioner or academic or influencer, or you don't know. It's, as I said, quite an informal session, but it'd be great just to know who's on the line and who's not. And I have, while you're typing in chat, just a little task for you. I'm going to ask if you've got your camera on or had your camera on, if you could do a little thing. So either little praying, just got the documents and I'm not sure, or I've nearly finished. So just to get a range of understanding of where we're up to in terms of where people are. So if you've got your screen on, I'm going to ask you if you kind of want to vote with your hands now. Is it pretty much going all right and you know what you're doing, or are you just at the very start, or are you somewhere in between? Now we've got Kat giving us a straight up, I've just got the documents, give me a minute. I sort of feel I know a couple of people. So it's Rachel, couple of people. Seal, I'm sure you've nearly finished. I'm not sure why your hand's not up there yet. So I can ask for a bit of a show of hands. Yeah, thank you. We've got a hand up. So a few people able to share. Great, thank you. If you can see people, maybe you're looking back and forth across a couple of screens of people. So you'll see there's other people who are able to tell you where they're at. Now, I know this is kind of a bit of a stupid thing, and I said to you it was a lunchtime chat, so you're able to eat lunch, so I'm going to let you relax. But the reason I included that is because actually that might be something like a short technique that you use, an icebreaker that you might do. It's written up as a kind of matchmaker, like a snap game, and you can do it online as we have, and you can ask people to create their own statements and actually say, yeah, that's me or that's not me. Partly as an educator to take the temperature of the room. Partly if you're working with a new subject, you want to know the experience of those that you're going to be working with, so you can pitch it right. So you could ask, you know, for example, on here, if this is completely new to you, put your hand up. If this is something that you know of as a family, as a sort of childhood experience, or it's your research interest. So you can play around with these kind of words and ideas in whatever subject. And the reason I asked you just to try that out with me is because it's the sort of thing you might consider writing up for your ECT toolkit. So those of you that have looked at your fellowship will know that you're asked to write something for the ECT toolkit. Now, the ECT toolkit is the Enhancing the Curriculum toolkit, but it's also full of things that you might use in a meeting, you might use if you're doing a workshop, if you're doing something with senior managers, even if you want to kind of do a vision board or you want to create a new structure for a meeting. It's full of great ideas. And so actually having these little techniques in the background is really helpful. And what we do is we ask people to contribute to them. So the ECT toolkit currently has 200 different examples of modules of mapping against Ondracomp for the whole knowledge exchange framework, all sorts of different ranges of ideas and things, and you are being asked to do one as your fellowship. So I just wanted to kind of start with something that was a very simple idea and say to you, you could write something similar to that up that you use. It doesn't have to be rocket science, it just has to be something that you know works. Because the idea of the ECT toolkit is it's from educators to educators. So you write it from yourself for someone else to use. It's kind of your gift to the sector. So we'll be coming back to that and just explaining where that fits in. But I did want to highlight that as part of our kind of starting point, is the ECT toolkit is going to be an important part of what you contribute. But we are looking at competence. So I'm going to be asking our VIP fellows to talk to you in a minute, but I just wanted to talk to you about the fact that we're looking at professional competence. So we're asking you to evidence that you're competent as an enterprise educator. And in that, if you've seen the actual flyer, you're asked to evidence your skills and background and be a reflective practitioner. So we know everybody in enterprise education has a different background. We know all sorts of rich experiences have brought you here, and we want you to explain and show off how that kind of contributes to you being a fellow. So I'm going to ask our VIP fellows to unmute themselves and say a few words. I don't know who wants to go first. I should have checked. We've got Saida and Phil, so I'm going to ask for someone to give me a shout if they're ready. And they're going to just actually talk to us about why they became a fellow and what sort of opportunity it gave them. So I'm going to check who we got.
I don't mind going first if you
Brilliant,
want me to.
thank you.
Hi everyone. Yeah, my name's Philip Pegg. I have to think about this. I'm Associate Director for Enterprise at Oxford Brookes University. Although at the time that I did my fellowship, which was back in 2019, I was Head of Enterprise and Entrepreneurship at the University of Huddersfield. I think Alison wanted to say why I did it. So I took the influencer pathway. I think I did it for a couple of reasons. First of all, I was a director at EEUK at the time, and I did some initial thinking as part of those director duties to help kind of steer towards the fellowship. And it just felt that once all of that was up and running, for my own credibility as a director, if I was going to be encouraging people to do this, as you know, when I met people at conferences and that sort of thing, that I should actually have been through the process myself. Otherwise it felt a bit sort of disingenuous to be sort of saying, oh, you must become a fellow, and I hadn't actually done it myself. But also I think when you're in enterprise education or any sort of education or any kind of stressful job, I think we spend a lot of time thinking about what we're currently doing and what we have to do next. And we're constantly juggling all of those things. And we might actually forget what we have done. And so part of the process of the fellowship is to actually reflect on the things that you have achieved to date. And so I think it was actually quite refreshing to have a task or to have something which was potentially going to give me a qualification and something that would enhance my credibility, but also gave me the opportunity to kind of look back rather than constantly looking forward and constantly being driven to do more and new stuff, to kind of say, oh, actually, maybe I did some good things in the past, and actually to look at those and to reflect on them and to be able to kind of assimilate all of that information in one place. So it was a few things really. It was about credibility, it was about authenticity, and it was about having the opportunity to reflect on the things that I felt that I had achieved to date, and that might then actually gave me some really good text, I'll be honest, as well. Text that I could use for other things. You know, when you're asked, you know, to give a bio or to put together a little synopsis on things that you've contributed in your role, it gave me all of that sort of text and evidence, if you like, that I could use. So I guess it was a number of different things, but the actual process, once I got my head around what was needed and which pathway I was going to do, was actually relatively straightforward. It wasn't anywhere near as onerous as I thought it was. The hardest thing was coming to the decision, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do this pathway. Is that enough, Alison? Sorry, I don't know how long to go on for.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I might bring you back in, but Saida, I know you wanted to share your route into doing this as well. So can we ask you to give a bit of background?
Yes, sure. First of all, hello to everyone on the call. It's great to obviously have you all here. I'm the Senior Student Enterprise Manager at London South Bank University. In terms of why I thought about the EEUK Fellowship, I think it's important to give you some context. I'd actually been practicing in enterprise education for probably more than 10 years before I came across the EEUK Fellowship and considered it. In that time, I'd been involved in a variety of activities, so things like providing startup support, one-to-one with students. I have a specialism in intellectual property as well, so my route into enterprise education was actually through practicing IP and supporting students with protecting their innovations, understanding trademarks, etc., until my practice widened and I started doing workshops, giving lectures, and that whole area of enterprise education I became more and more involved with. What I found was this was like lots of activity and it felt quite sort of jumbled up, if that makes sense. And I sort of found that I had no coherent way of conveying to the institution, to myself or to others, like what all of that work that I do was and how to relay it to them. And in that time as well, I'd also sort of kept an eye out for opportunities to get a qualification as well to validate what I do. And I didn't really want to go into like a full-on, say, master's course or something in enterprise. So on and off, I'd been looking for something. So the fellowship for me, it really gave me an opportunity to pull all of my work together. Like I felt very proud of my body of work, and it just really gave me that opportunity to pull it together. So for me also, in terms of my career, in terms of like going forward and what's next after like more than 10 years in enterprise education, it gave me a chance to look back and pull all of that work together. And it also, for me, I felt like it gave an opportunity to validate my work and to give credibility to it as well. And I hate to say it as well, but also legitimacy, because I feel like there's still people that don't really understand what enterprise education is. And I didn't wear a badge, I didn't have a qualification. Yet I was advising people, to certainly academic colleagues, in terms of their learning and teaching practice. And it sometimes felt disingenuous to be doing that without having a badge to wear. So there's lots of variety of reasons, but certainly for me, like validity, credibility, and some legitimacy. And also for me, a way of conveying to myself like what I do, and being strong in, you know, my activities that I do, in you know, the ideas that I come up with, and for people to trust me with that. So both for myself, for my institution, but also externally in terms of you know, what my work is. So there's the variety of reasons in terms of why I thought about it. I know the other question that was thrown at me is what it did for me. And this was one that I didn't struggle with it, but I felt like there were quite a few different things for me to consider and think about. So the reflective process, even for this, Alison, has been really interesting. I would say for me that it's been absolutely amazing. So almost 2 years, I think it's been 2 years on from getting my fellowship. I feel like it's really elevated my practice. It's certainly given me a lot of confidence in terms of what I do, why I do it, and who I do it for. And also, a lot of my work is consultative, so I spend a lot of time providing support to academic colleagues to review their modules, for example. I also get approached by others in terms of advice and guidance that they need. So it's really changed my role from being someone who just delivers activities to somebody who is now supporting people to underpin activities, enterprise education that they're building into their modules. So certainly it's adding value to academics' work, in direct teaching, so in terms of what we deliver with students. But the other element for me is around, supporting them to perhaps like revalidate their curriculum. When academics are approaching me about those things, there is a bit in revalidating, which is around adding value. So how do you add value to your curriculum? So those are some of the things that I now get approached about, which is completely different to maybe startup activity and other things that I was doing before. So for me, I feel like I'm now more of a solid package as an enterprise education practitioner, which is the only way I can describe it to you when I was thinking about it and how I can relay all the different things that it's done for me in terms of where I am now. The other thing for me is trust. So people trusting my knowledge, my expertise, that's been really important as a practitioner. That was really all I was going to say, apart from the final bit around, for me, I initially struggled with the EEUK fellowship. When I first saw the application form, I felt quite overwhelmed by the questions. And it may have been at the time, because I've not had an opportunity to reflect before, it may have been a little bit around confidence as well. But it was actually second time round, maybe like a few months later, when I looked at the application form again, I did then feel like, actually, I do have quite a strong body of work. I do have a lot of evidence across all the things that I've been involved in. And I'm going to have an attempt at the application form. And actually, once I started writing, it then came more naturally because I'd been engaged with it for quite a long time. I'm now in a place where, as I say, I do a lot of consultative type work, both within the UK and also internationally. Just this morning, I was on a call with somebody in Ghana who was, wanting some advice and guidance about what they're doing. And I'm now encouraging others to do their EEUK fellowship. And same as Phil, I would say, having done it myself, I'm more obviously knowledgeable and know the sort of process that they need to go through. And that's me. I hope that's given some insight. Alison?
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. And I think the whole package, I think I just love that. Phil, I don't know if there's anything you want to come in on what you've heard just in terms of reflections, but I think it's interesting that you've both had different routes in, but it's kind of given you that sort of sense of, well, I know what I do now and I know what I can offer. So Phil, I'll give you the final word as I just share my screen back up, but thank you, Saeed, that was brilliant. And for those of you that are joining live, you will get a chance to chat and ask essential questions later, so they're not going away, they're just here to kind of give you some headlines, and then they'll be back later. So thank you to both of them. So Phil, is there anything you want to share?
No, I don't think so. I just put something in the chat because I know I saw someone was a bit confused about what pathway, and I think that's quite a personal thing as well. So at the time I did mine, I was midway through a doctorate of enterprise, so I felt like I had the academic pathway kind of covered, and my role was much more about persuading and influencing not only students but actually colleagues as well. So that I think sometimes a chat, perhaps with Alison or another fellow, helps you to kind of determine which pathway would best bolster you. I could have gone down perhaps any of them at the time, but it was a combined decision based on what else I was working on at the time. And I think that's probably something to consider, kind of looking at yourself in the round. Where do I want to take this? Ultimately, it doesn't really matter because you're going to get a fellowship at the end of the route, but the questions that you answer and the evidence that you will kind of gather might be more useful if you've had that sort of thought process. And certainly the influencer evidence I've used subsequently to argue my case for things. So I don't know if that's helpful.
That's really helpful and really sets me up for the next bit, because that is the first kind of issue I want to talk about, is your pathway requirements. So I do think it is essential. There's some colleagues who started with one and swapped, and colleagues who, as we've heard listening to our two guests already, kind of are doing a bit of everything, because that's sort of what enterprise education can be like, is that you feel your kind of job description says one thing, but your work says another, your heart says another, your students need something else. So you're drawn across a lot of the pathways. So I'd like to just spend a little bit of time going through what they are. There's a couple of people who are on this call who I think maybe are in the wrong pathway. And so hopefully we'll talk about that, or we can talk individually. But I'm just going to give you all an overview just to reassure you that you're in the right one, and give you a chance just to have that overview. The other thing I'm going to ask you to think about is, having mentioned the ECT toolkit, is that you are only asked to write one submission. So you're either going to write a guide, which is something for someone else to use, so kind of how-to guide. And I like to think of that as if, I don't know, someone you really like at work's gone, oh my God, you know that thing you do, can you write it down for me? So it's written so someone else could pick it up and work with it. So did you need to give them some slides, or is it just to give them a sense of the timings? So it's written from one kind of colleague to another. So you tell them the things that they really need to know, like, don't try and do this in lecture theatre, blah, 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 because the room's awful, or don't try and do it when you've got over 40 people in the room because it just makes too much noise and no one can hear themselves think. Those kind of comments are what we want to hear. And there's ways of like indicating that in the criteria, the venue, the size, and the thing that you'd really want to know is, well, how long does it take? And then you outline how you do it. The case study might be something that you want to write up, which is something you've done. Maybe you taught 400 engineers in a massive lecture theatre and made it interactive. Write that up and share how you did that. And then you can include some photos or different things of actually their comment, the impact it had upon them. So you can have a think about that. If you are an influencer, you might be sitting there thinking, I don't do interactive things with anybody, but you'll be working on things that are useful to share. So you might want to do a case, or you might want to do a guide of how you got to where you completed a bid or a process or something, and I'll show you some different examples of that. So it really is that kind of, what would you like to share from your body of work with the rest of the sector? But as Phil led us into it, I'm going to just start with the pathways. So you'll see in the documents that there's 3 pathways that we indicate, knowing that you work across a wide range of activities, and I just want to go through them now. Basically, they can be split up. You might recognize your job title down the grey side of the screen and think, actually, yeah, that's me, that's kind of what I do. Or you might go, do you know what, I kind of do a bit of everything. But the kind of idea is that if you are working in curricula, so if you're working with students, if you're doing things that have committees, they have external examiners, they have student feedback, you're marking and assessing, then that's an educator or the academic pathway. So you might be a curriculum developer working with an academic, but you're seeing that full process through of a module. If you have that level of feedback, that's the pathway that you should go for. It will be easier for you to do a pathway that you're really clear about. So as Phil said, you might find that you span 2 or 3 different things, but my advice to you is do the one that is easiest for you, that you have the materials on, that you have all the evidence for, because there is no difference between them. No one's going to go, so which pathway did you take? You have achieved fellowship at the end of it. So there's no extra brownie points for really stretching yourself or testing yourself. What it is showcasing that you are competent at what you do. So pick the one that you're good at. If you are currently doing business startup, you're working in employability, you have people knocking on doors going, I sort of think I might want to start a business, or you're doing workshops about what if skills and competencies. If you're working with Entrecomp, if you're doing extracurricular stuff, then practitioner might be the one that's of most use to you, that might immediately spring to mind. And if you're working either across lots of faculties, lots of stakeholders, extracurricular things outside the institution, or you're managing and supporting or administrating that group of people, you might find that you don't actually fit those two and you're actually influencing. So you're managing up, you're managing across, you're working the whole university single-handedly, it feels like sometimes, in order to get your knowledge exchange outcomes, in order to get your students in the right places for the activities that your centre's running. And so actually you're constantly creating relationships with other people, whether they're in the institution or outside the institution, and therefore you're an influencer. So you might still at the minute thinking, oh, I'm not quite sure, but we will take time today to look at that so that you're working on the right paperwork. As I mentioned, there's the ECT toolkit, and I thank Rob for putting up the links on things. The ECT toolkit is one of EEUK's main sort of gifts to the sector, I think. We've got many colleagues in Wales to help us who set this up originally, but it's structured there for you. There's lots of different examples, and if you look and you type into the search engine the fellow, the FEEUK thing, you'll get all the fellowship ones listed in one quick kind of access thing, and I'll show you that again later. But I just, thank you, Rob, just wanted to say to you, if you do that, you will start to see these different things. If you've not looked at ECT toolkit already, what you've got on one side of your screen is the first 10 results. If you click on them, they comes up in this style that I mentioned, where it says, well, what sort of environment do you need? Well, if we're doing a pop-up shop, you're going to need a special environment. You can't just do that in a lecture theatre. And which of the QAA themes they come from, your QAA 2018 guidance, they're at the back. They are listed with what you're trying to achieve. Now, you're not trying in this case to say I'm doing everything, which sadly this example is, so that makes it look like that is what I'm saying, but you'll see that there's 7 things there. If you hover over them, it tells you what they are, and you might go, do you know what, I'm just looking at creativity, so that's 1, and that's all you're looking at, and you indicate that so that when someone else is searching, they can find an example that will help them. And you'll see it's written fairly clearly, just so that people can understand what you did, you know, how I started it. Obviously, if you've got references and support material, background that you want to share, then please put it in. One of the other questions I get asked by a lot of people is, I don't do this on my own. And to be honest, we all know we don't do this on our own. We're all, as they say, standing on the shoulders of giants. We're all working with colleagues who get us through the day. We're all working with someone who went, well, have you thought of doing? And you're like, oh, yeah, and you go and do it. So you can acknowledge colleagues and friends and advisors in this, but ideally it should be the work that you've led on or that you've been key member of the team in. But we don't expect this to be just work you've done entirely on your own, because we know a lot of enterprise education work isn't like that. So don't feel that you have to kind of invent a whole new icebreaker in order to have an example for ECT toolkit. Maybe you team teach or you run a workshop series with somebody, feel free to write that up. So I just wanted to make that clear. And I just wanted to explain what the different pathways were. So apologies if you are very clear about this. So what you'll find is each of the documents, you will have already made this decision and maybe thinking, just want to check I made the right one. You'll find the documentation is the same apart from section 2. So we'll talk about the documentation in its fullest, but I'm just going to focus on section 2 at the moment, because that's where the differences lie. So you'll see in this, it says, for the section 1, you're asked to make the case for an enterprise educator. So you're basically trying to explain your role, like, why does the university need me? Why do my students need me? Why am I here doing what I do? Everybody's going to answer that question, whether they're doing the academic pathway, the influencer, or the practitioner pathway. What you'll find if you've chosen the academic pathway is you have 8 separate things to look at, and you're basically focusing your submission on the thing that you do most of, the thing that you have the most evidence of, which is planning and delivering effective enterprise or entrepreneurship curricula. So in detail, that looks like this. If you are teaching in curricula, a lot of this will make complete sense to you. If you're not, don't worry, because this isn't your pathway. But if you know about assessment, if you're thinking about how you gave feedback, if you've got minutes of a committee, if you know the student rep, if you've had feedback from your students, this isn't too difficult to pull together, because you'll be thinking, well, I know what I do and why I do it. And actually, as Saida said, you just have to stop and think, actually, how do I know that? And why do I know that? And you can pull it together. So you'll be drawing the evidence together from actually what you teach and how you teach it. Moving to the influencer, again, you'll see it's the same 4 elements. But in this case, the influencer is looking at a broader role of building collaborative relationships. So this is recognizing that you kind of oil the wheels and make things happen. You're sort of pushing things forward so that other people are delivering, maybe. So this might be because you're the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Learning and Teaching an enterprise or research an enterprise, or it might be because you're administrating an enterprise centre. It is about how you're making sense of that value, how you're getting a network together, how you're engaging with stakeholders. So this is really, how do you keep on top of your job? How do you know that you're doing the right thing? How do you know that maybe health needs some particular support, but actually colleagues in geography are doing all right? And actually, how have you worked on that and built that relationship up? Have you been ensuring there's a network or a forum or a group, or are you working externally, supporting bids or regional work with the city region? So all sorts of things might be coming into this, not all of that, but some of that, but you'll be contributing to your institution through relationships. So if that sounds like you, whatever level you're doing that at, then maybe you should consider the influencer pathway. And then we've got the third one, which is practitioner, which is if you are thinking that your work is primarily working with students on advice, on startup engagement, on inspiring them. Are you doing workshops? Are you doing startup kind of programs? Are you doing the intent to start, or are you doing awareness raising? This is about how are you reaching those people. So again, we've got 4 things to focus on in this area, which includes particularly diversity and inclusion, because if it's extracurricular, how are you reaching everybody, not just the same old, same old? So how are you getting that positive behavior? How are you sharing and learning and inspiring those learners? So you'll see they're quite different, but together, what you're being asked to do in terms of your application is you're making the case for your role. You're then completing your competencies, and that's what I'm going to talk about next. And then you're evaluating your own practice and reviewing it. So really the first point, part section 1, I will talk about, but we could all have a go at that now. We all know that the university employs us to do something specific. It'll ask us on how do we keep up to date? How do we know what we're doing? Well, you're on a call like this because you're caring about this kind of work. So this is the sort of activities that we see active, reflective practitioners, academics or influencers doing. But what they do, what we're going to ask you now is think about how you demonstrate your competence. So hopefully by now, one of those things is starting to make you think, oh, I was sort of leaning towards the right one, or I did pick the right one. And what I want to do is just explain what is competence, because this can be the key to actually starting to make the right bullet points and starting to get your notes together. So in terms of skills and competence is that slightly higher level than knowing you can do it, but actually knowing which sort of skill to pull out the bag when you're in the middle of a moment, or you're designing a curriculum, or you're in a meeting, or you're going to present to senior managers. How do you know what you're going to do? Because you're a professional working in this area, so you're competent. You know, actually, I'm not going to ask them to do an icebreaker in the middle of the Pro-Vice Chancellor's meeting. What I am going to do is show the work from our students. What I am going to do is create a vision board with photos that we've got. I'm going to make sure that I get impact from my skills. So you're drawing tools out of your kind of toolkit in order to deliver what you're doing and how you do it. So really that's a slightly higher level way of knowing what to do, I guess, is kind of a way of thinking about it. And that's what you're demonstrating in your fellowship, is that you're competent at your job. So competence is saying, like, I know I can do it. If you think about stuff, I'm not saying like it's easy, but you know you can present to a group of students, you know you can talk to a small business owner who wants to know how they can help, or a potential sponsor, or a student that isn't interacting too well, or you've got a small business in your incubator that you're just sensing needs some support. How do you know that you can do that? Because you do it. And this is really the essence of the fellowship. It's about, what do you do? It's not asking you to learn something new. You're not being asked to read anything extra. You're being asked to showcase what you do already. So you know you can do it because you're already doing it. And that's kind of the thing. And I think the hardest thing is actually you're going to have to show off a little bit. So be prepared, pull yourself up. You're going to have to show off about how you know you're good at what you do. And that's what's hardest for most people. So we're asking you to say what you know you can do and how you know you can do it, and what example you have of that. So there's lots of ways in which people look at competency, and I'm just showing this not because you need to learn it, not because you need to look at it, but because one of the things that I notice people miss out on is when you don't know something, it's kind of like aha when you realize, oh, that sort of first level of like, oh, I didn't know that, and then you kind of get used to doing it. And then the thing that's difficult with writing up your submission is actually you're at the point now where you kind of do it unconsciously. So you're watching a room, you can see when a group are starting to need some attention, you've got those plates spinning, but you kind of know. And that is because you are a master of what you do, you're competent at what you do. So we're going to ask you to reflect on some of those things that kind of become second nature to you a little bit. And that's where you have to go deep into your reflection. You're not just writing about something you've just learned, you're writing about something you know and you're confident about. And that's why you're sort of what they call unconsciously skilled at it. You know how to own a room when you walk into it. You know how to reconcile these different stakeholders' interests and make sure that you can come up with a plan for everyone to go forward, because you know that's because it's what you do. So the sort of way of looking at that, these diagrams are all showing the same thing, is really that practice is a skill builder. So you're practicing this over and over again, and what you need to do in this case is reflect on it. So we're going to ask you to reflect, and that's really what stages 3 and 4 are in the fellowship. So 1 is who you are and what you do. 2 is show us that you can do it. Tell us when you've done it, how you're competent at it. And then sections 3 and 4 are reflecting on that. So there's got to be a bit where you think, oh, I could have done that differently, or that module's never quite right, or that meeting's always a little bit lumpy. You're constantly doing that kind of stuff and reflecting on it. This is the place where you pull it all together and actually go, do you know what? What I want to do is improve the paperwork on that meeting and ensure that we're quicker and faster and we're supporting people to engage, because it's not really running right. So you're reflecting on that and writing that sort of stuff up. And it might be at the end, section 4 is you're asked to do an action plan, and at the end of that action plan you might want to go, do you know what, I want to sit in on some other meetings. It might be a crazy suggestion like that, or I want to go and talk to an institution nearby or far away and actually see how they handle their relationships with small businesses, their small business forum, or their work in this area, because I know it could just be a bit different and I want some inspiration. So that could be your action. So you're looking at your whole fellowship as a kind of story. Who you are and what you do is section 1. How do you know you're competent at what you do? Because you're going to evidence it in section 2. And then 3 is your reflection, your values. How do you know that you do a good and professional job at it? How do you take time to think about that? And then 4 is, do you know what? I'm good at this and I like it, but there's still work to be done, because you're reflecting on it and you think, I'd really like to do a bit more on improving my evaluation. You know, when I wrote my fellowship, and I do have my certificate to hand, when I wrote my fellowship, my action plan was very much about evaluation, because I do a lot of workshops. So I would email you afterwards and say, was that okay? And you'd write back going, yeah. And what have I learned from that? Like, of the 20 people on the call, 5 of them wrote back and said it was fine. So I know nothing. I don't get any information to take that forward. I'm not asking the right questions. I'm not getting good enough responses, and I'm not taking anything that I can improve on. So what I want to do, although I'm already thinking I should have checked with Saida and Phil who's going first, I've made a little mental note on that, but that's a small thing. What would you tell me? How will I get better? And I want to improve my evaluation in the longer term in terms of presenting. So that would be something that I would be working on, and I put that in my action plan. So in terms of looking at these, there's an easy way of talking about your competencies. I think Rob's able to stick this into the link for you, but it's basically the government use this when they're doing recruitment. It's called CAR or STAR. I prefer CAR because it takes up less words in the word count, but they're basically the same. And actually, if your students are applying for jobs in the civil service, they will be writing like this. So you will find that this might be a language that your students, if they're doing interviews, if they're at that level that they're starting to look at what happens to them after university, they're going to be familiar with this through employability work anyway. If you haven't seen this, the government document is available and in the materials, but basically there isn't any huge difference between CAR or STAR. As I said, I literally, when I did mine, chose CAR because it helps with the word count, because there's 4 things to write about with STAR, but it depends what you're writing about. Basically, you're looking at either the situation, the task, or in CAR it's called context. So like, why are you doing what you're doing? And then you write about the action and the result. And the key is knowing that you don't have to only pick from the amazingly brilliant things that went 100% well. You can write about the things that you think, do you know what, and we could have improved the feedback at the end, or we didn't actually have enough time, we packed it full of activities and we didn't take enough time to do reflection. That's another one of my actions. So I'm going to take some more time on that. So you're actually identifying this. And so you're thinking about the things you wrote about in section 2. So you're thinking about your competencies. I'm competent in motivating, I'm competent in the classroom, I'm competent when I'm influencing my stakeholders, whichever pathway it is, and then thinking of actually how you can improve on that, and you're giving examples of how you know you can do it. So this is section 2. So you might, for example, be reflecting on how you took a load of stuff online, or that even coming back into the classroom required a massive rethink, or your hybrid working. So that's basically your situation. Your situation might be getting your enterprise centre back in the room when you've got staff and students who've worked online or not, and they aren't on campus as much, and the businesses they work with aren't on campus as much. So you could pick your context, your situation, your car or star situation, and then you're thinking like, well, what did I do? What was the action? How did I work? And that is working with other people. And I surprised myself, and I dug deep, and I learned this, and I got back on Zoom having not done it for a bit, or whatever it was. And then what was the result? And this is where you start to see the reflection coming in terms of, well, actually next time I would do it differently. So we did achieve, we got everyone over the line. My pass rates have never been better since I changed the way I was doing it, but next time I would also have a drop in one-to-one for my students now they're back on campus. So it's a very simple structure. So if you take that pathway, section 2, and put CAR under each of the lines, so if you've got following the academic pathway, you've got 8. If you're looking at the others, you've got 6 and 4, I think, and just write CAR under each of them. Those are the bullet points you're going to be filling in. Give me an example of when you did something, what was the action and what was the result, and you'll be starting to draw out those elements in terms of like, what would I do next time? And that's your reflection and that's your action plan. So it does start to build up. So I am conscious as questions, but I can't quite see them at the moment, so I'll be looking at those in a moment. So do feel free to write them in. I want to just give you a last little bit about what are the assessors looking for. So I know for many people, you kind of go, yeah, this is the paperwork I've looked at. I keep looking at it, and actually I haven't really started. And there's a reason, it's because I don't know where to start. What should I be writing in? Is this an academic style? How do I phrase this? And I think for a lot of people, actually, I likened it to imagining you're being interviewed. So imagine you've got like a vox pop thing. You're writing clear statements to answer the questions, but you need to give evidence as to why you think what you think. So I think what I think about enterprise education because I read the QAA guidance. I've got comp on the wall behind me. I see it every day. This is why I think what I think. I follow my institutional policy. I go to EEUK webinars and I pick up the latest thing. It's not saying like I'm constantly in the library searching for the latest USA insights into networking. It's how do you do, why do you do what you do currently. So the assessors in section 1 are definitely looking for really clear statements about what you do and why your role's important. So in terms of this, you'll see, for example, question, if you're doing it as 1.1, 1.2, if you get to 1.4, how do you keep up to date with current thinking on enterprise education? It's not rocket science. You do it because you've got the EEUK newsletter, you've gone to the conference, you're here, you're working, you're engaged, you've got contacts, you're sharing, you're thoughtful about it. So you don't have to write masses of things. You don't have to make anything up that you're not doing. Maybe your boss sends you around the city region LEP newsletter and you have a little look down that every time it comes around. It's about what you do and how you do it. It's not about saying you do something, like you have to pretend to be someone you're not. You're literally sharing what you do. So when it comes to section 1, it is about stating your role, thinking about the value that you add and thinking about that underpinning and thinking about your behavior skills and attributes as your competencies. So it's very clearly drawing in, like my institution wants this to happen, our targets are this, we're number 1 in our region for this, and that, like what's important and why you're doing it is informed by your context, and that's your government, your nation state, your region, your institution. They will feature in that section. Section 2, as I said, check your pathway, check your ECT toolkit. If you write an ECT toolkit that's about your competencies, it makes it so much easier, because you can go in the example in ECT toolkit. I talked about teaching 400 geographers, or I talked about running the enterprise forum, or coordinating the entire series of workshops. You'll see that I am influencing this group of people constantly, because so you do your CAR on that. So you can draw across examples from your toolkit example for section 2. It makes it easier for you. So link those up. And what you're doing here is answering those point by point. And as I said, use your CAR or STAR method to keep it tight, and imagine someone's interviewing you, and it's kind of easier to think of it like that. It helps you to think about just making some notes. So I think Saida said it was kind of daunting to start with. So actually, if you think, well, I've just got bits, I'm going to write some notes against things, you can actually just start with looking for the evidence. So, for example, we've got the academic one in front of us, and it says 2.7, providing constructive and timely feedback. Well, how do you know you do that? Have your students ever written and said, oh, thanks for that, it was just what I needed before I did something else? Like, that's the sort of thing that you'll be using as evidence that you know you're doing what you do, that your committee referenced your work in this, or that you've had a commendation from the external examiner. Whatever it is, think about the evidence you've got to prove that you're competent at your job. And it might be that you take the decision today to spend a year collecting that evidence, and that's good too. Or you might think, do you know what, I've got loads of stuff from last thing I was looking at, and I need to start pulling it together. I know people that email themselves a box, kind of have an inbox thing of just things they're going to use. I know people have got actual genuine boxes on their desk, and they drop stuff in. So they collected the kind of comments or feedback or testimonials. And it might be that you need to ask a small business to send you an email to say why an event was helpful or something, and make sure you keep that. But think about all the sort of support and evidence that you might already have. So in section 2, as I've said, this is where your CAR fits in. And as I said, it doesn't have to go 100%. And in fact, it's easier if it doesn't, because that gives you your evidence for section 4, because that gives you your action. I want to work on this because it's not right. Who amongst us is doing everything perfect? You want to say, I'm working on something. So section 3 is about values. Asks you how you know what you're doing, asks you how do you know you're doing it right, and do you take time to think about it? And again, this is something that you maybe need to dig a bit deeper on, because you'll be doing stuff and you kind of, it is that second nature side of things. So maybe you are working with Advanced HE and you've got fellowship with them. Maybe your institution has values and guidance. Maybe you have a profession with a code of practice. Maybe you used to have a profession with a code of practice from working in an industry. They will all have influenced you as to who you are and what you do and why you do what you do. And so those are the sort of things about professionalism and timeliness and being inclusive. Those are the kind of values that you'll have. Or you might want to draw on one of the sector ones. EEUK talks about integrity. Advanced HE has its whole principles listed, and that's something that people often draw on. Not to say individual examples, but they're the things that influence our whole sector. They're the things that influence our approach. But you will get asked, how do you get feedback from other people, and how do you know you're doing a good job? When do you take time to think about that? And again, for me, that was really powerful, because it made me realize I evaluate individual projects, individual things, modules or teaching or workshops. I rarely sit and look back and go, do you know what? Collectively, they're all telling me the same thing, or I've got 2 issues that I need to look at. And actually bringing it together is a really kind of thoughtful process. So you need to ask yourself why a lot. Why do I think that? Why? How do I know what I do? Why do I think that? Why do I think that? And ultimately, it will kind of rise to the surface and give you stuff to write about. So that one's the one that I think takes a little bit more time, a little bit more depth of reflection, but it does lead to section 4, which is your action plan. So from that, you will be able to go, actually, because I wasn't happy with the competence in section 2, it isn't maybe fitting with my values of inclusivity. We're doing this great stuff. We're advertising our workshops across the university, but we tend to get 18-year-old white males attending. What are we doing wrong? My action plan is to go and dig in on that and find out why, go and visit some other institutions, find out what they're doing, review our work. Or actually, maybe it's not an issue in the workshops, but I see it in the incubator. So the only people who are following all our journey all the way through are those that don't have caring responsibilities. So actually, our action plan is to maybe have a think about that, find out what other people are doing. And your action plan can be reading something, it can be visiting somebody, it can be attending IEC, it can be saying, do you know what, I think my ECT toolkit case study was so brilliant, I want to write it up and share it as a IEC showcase. I'm going to put it into a conference because actually I feel that we haven't acknowledged the work we're doing enough. So you're making a personal action plan. It is not your job's personal development plan, it's your own plan for yourself. And that is the bit that you'll share with somebody else. Only this section, you'll share a table, maybe a smart objectives table, what you want to do when you want to do it by very much kind of clear time bound kind of thing, when you're going to do that, and you'll share that with presumably your boss, but for many people they have a kind of counterpart or a colleague or a client, depending on how it works, who can write and vouch for you to say that they understand that you're committed to doing this and that they support your application, as we need a letter of support to go in with your application. But it quite often isn't your direct manager, it could be a colleague that you work with a lot who's senior, or it could be somebody who sees your work, or it could be a fellow from EEUK or a member of the board. So someone who knows what you do and sees your action plan and kind of signs off that they've heard you saying what you want to commit to and they recognize that. So that's basically the run of the sections. And in that, as I said, the assessors like to see quite like to see a table, to be honest. They quite like to see smart objectives. And you will need to put a bibliography in. We've sent some back because people haven't. We've sent them back because we haven't had the letter of support. So you do need to provide all the information for your assessor. But the top tips from EEUK are really, aside said, scan through the guidance, think, oh, crikey, and then start to think about your paperwork and then read the guidance again, and it'll start to click. You're not going to just take a couple of days off work and nail this. It's a slower process. I think it's a slow burn. It's something that you can start to write bullet points against, something you can think about. And my personal top tips are very much this kind of do it as if it's an interview. So someone's going to be asking you a question. And imagine that you're bringing in that expertise rather than, so you'll reference things like you might reference the QAA, you don't need to go into detail about it, but imagine it's an interview in the street. So somebody says, how do you know what to do at the university? And you go, because I follow the university's institutional strategy, I follow the national guidance, I follow this, and this. So it's like you're throwing in the things that kind of scaffold and support your work, but you're not having to cite them all in immense detail because we're all professionals working in this area. We know what you're talking about, but we do need you to say where you got it from. You didn't just sit here and invent enterprise education. As I said, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, and so we want to showcase actually where I got it from and how it was useful. So the last point on here is about buddying up, and we're going to talk about that in about an hour. I've got one of our board, Lauren's joining us to talk about whether that's something you would like us to formally start to connect you with. But I'm conscious of time, and I'm conscious that hopefully our guests are joining. So I want to tell you who they are. Let's come back to this. So we should be joined by Inga, who is going to talk about academic. Marcus, who's also EEUK director as Inga is, he'll be talking to us about the academic pathway. Saida, who you've met, who's practitioner, but as you can see, as she said, very varied, very broad background. Phil, who went for influencer, but again, broad knowledge as former EEUK director. Amanda has joined the call. Amanda was one of our very first fellows, and there's actually a webinar with Amanda, which I think Rob might have the link to, and we'll make sure you get that in an email. So if you wanted to have a different kind of perspective, there's Amanda talking about 20 minutes in. So Amanda, I think you're here with us today. Victoria's joining us as an EEUK fellow, as is Ed. And I think last but not least is Marek. So Marek's talking about influencers, and Victoria and Ed are talking about practitioner work. Sorry, just getting my names in the right place. So we have allocated you to a particular group, and we want to make sure that you're happy with that. So I'm going to close the kind of formal recorded part of this. Thank those of you that have joined us just to hear how it all works. These are the fellows that have very kindly joined us today, but there's many, many fellows who are happy to talk to you. So if you know anybody from that original photo from the Hall of Fame, please feel free to contact them and ask for their advice, because it's one of the kind of requirements of the fellowship is that you support the sector, and so I know they're all really keen to do that. So I'm going to close it there on the formal recorded side. So oops,